It has been a long time, and we are back, y'all. My name is Dr. Raina J. León, and I'm with my mother, Dr. Norma D. Thomas, and you are listening to Generational Archives, the show where we connect, heal, uncover through intergenerational conversations and archival research. And if you've been following along, you have probably been like, there's so many great episodes, and then they disappeared. Is this like one of those podcasts that is just so moving and powerful and life changing and things are happening and then they ghost us? Yeah, that's what happened. But we're back. So, mommy, what have we done in the meantime?
Well, you had a baby, so
I
that's the
had a
big
baby. I
excuse.
had a baby 2 weeks ago, but I was also forming this child, and there were health things and changes, and the last time we recorded, we also had just come back from the National Book Awards, or we were going to the National
Right.
Book Awards in New York, so we got our fancy dids, fancy outfits on, and walked the red carpet.
That was amazing. That wasn't on my bucket list, but it could have been, because when I realized I was going to walk a red carpet and that I was going to be able to have my picture taken as on the red carpet, and when they asked me to come forward, they said, your sister can come up and get her picture taken.
She was very happy
So
about that.
I said they were all my new best friends. And the host was LeVar Burton.
Yes.
Oprah Winfrey was there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was probably the most crowded post-COVID activity I've been to.
It was tight.
Because they had too many people at a seat, but you met amazing, incredible people. I just had the best time going to the National Book Award. So I was so happy to be Raina's plus one.
Mm-hmm. Yep, unfortunately, I was sick most of the night with this baby. This baby is very different from his siblings in that they all were born with hair, but I think that the old wives' tale that you have the indigestion and the acid reflux, the more hair your babies have. He had the same amount, but I had 3 times the amount. I did not have the same or any of the acid reflux that I had with him with my other children. So unfortunately, that evening was kind of the emergence of it, and not a good one. Not a good one. But
speaking of
still had a good time.
I don't know if we ever talked about bucket list, but mine was always very short. I wanted to learn how to play the piano again, which I did. I wanted to
learn Spanish.
I wanted to get in a limousine before it was the last ride. So I've been in limousines. I wanted to go to the motherland, so I got to go to Africa. And the last one is to learn Spanish after being married to a Puerto Rican for a very long time, to learn Spanish, at least to some conversational level, because I understand a good deal.
Well, and I have to applaud our relationship because, hey, like the piano thing, I helped to facilitate that.
And you all helped to buy me one.
Yes, to buy one. We worked together. My husband,
these piano lessons
my brother chipped in for that, and also going to the motherland. There we go.
That was you too.
Yep, you came with me as my co-instructor for a class that I taught in Kenya. So yeah, it says something about the strength of mother-daughter relationships and supporting one another in realizing dreams, right?
So writing my memoir is not on my bucket list, but
you started that.
But I did start it.
And you started, well, you did some work in a class that you were taking with me, which is kind of cool.
But it was also, the impetus was you said you were writing your memoir, and you were very young.
I was like in my 20s because I had lived life.
I figured if you were writing yours, then I should start mine. And my husband keeps saying he wants to read it because people would really want to read it, even though I keep saying I'm a country girl from Western Pennsylvania who would want to read my memoir. But if things go well and the Lord's on my side, then I'll get that done too.
Yeah. I don't know what actually would be on my bucket list. Because I'm really good about dreaming things and then just making them happen. So when I think about a bucket list, I think about something that you have to really, really reach for to make happen. And
well, I have one, but it would not be on that you would put on your bucket list, but I would put on your bucket list, and that's to get organized. Please get organized.
That's what I have you for.
You make my life so much easier.
That's what I have you for.
You're the dreamer who needs somebody else to help you organize. Although you can get the dream done, it's the whole thing around the dream.
Yes.
The infrastructure around the dream.
Y'all, I just don't like paperwork. I really don't like paperwork. And I've realized that I best work when I can like body double with someone else, and I feel that there are other people around me who are working on the things, and I have a list of the things, and I see someone else working on their things, and then I can work on my things. I'm sure that there are people who are listening who are like, yes, I identify with that.
We've also we've talked previously about having the experience of talking about family, the whole family information, and then information coming out of the woodwork.
Yes.
Well, I don't know that we actually inspired, but we do have some cousins who have started a podcast.
Right, and who have started to connect dots of missing parts of the family history for them through listening to the podcast. So thank you all for reaching out and sharing your story. And I hope that there are so many others who, if not like related to us, are inspired by the search for our peoples and the reclamation of our stories. So one of the things that we're going to shift into talking about more about of one figure, my great grandfather, Walter Satterwhite. And the great thing about going to the National Book Awards was that we also had plans to interview Aunt Lorraine. So this is my great Aunt Lorraine, your Aunt Lorraine, in New York. And originally we were planning to actually go to her spot, but the timing didn't work and she was really busy. But we had this wonderful conversation with her about her father. And she later shared a lot of pictures with me, which we'll share some of those on the YouTube channel. And the funny thing about doing interviews is that you learn a lot, and then sometimes you feel like you learn nothing at all. So who was Walter Satterwhite, Mommy?
Well, and again, we had done a podcast on my father and his father and my mother and her mother, and we had done one on my dad's mother. So we decided, well, let's find out more about Walter Satterwhite, because when we've asked other family members, they didn't know him.
Yeah.
So he's like one of these people who seems to be elusive. So we did interview my Aunt Lorraine, and I guess we should start out by saying he was born in, and I wrote this down, and I can't remember. I don't have my note. Oh, you have my note. That's why I can't find it. He was born in 1914, died in 1969. I was born in 1953, so I was 16 years old when he died and never talked to him. Don't know anything about him. As far as we were concerned, we knew we had a grandfather, but he didn't exist, so I knew nothing about him. He was the son of Pinckney and Annabelle, and he was one of 10 children. And he was married to my grandmother, Sarah Logan. If I remember, there's a significant age difference between them. She was like 15 and he was 21. And then he married a second time to Elizabeth Bates up in New York. My grandfather had at least 3 different families. So we had first my mother and my Aunt Bernice. Then it seems like my Aunt Lorraine told me there was another aunt that was in Washington, D.C. They did live in Washington, D.C., and I often think in my head, is this what broke my grandparents up because of this affair in Washington, D.C.? I don't know why he went to New York, but it could be because we found out they had first cousins up there. So that may be why they ended up in Brooklyn, or he ended up in Brooklyn. He married again, but somewhere in there's another aunt, and she's still living. Aunt Lorraine knows her they look just alike because we've seen pictures, so you can't deny that they're related. In fact, the way she found out that she had this sibling was because people kept confusing her with this other person. And when she finally saw her, she realized why. So they have had some limited contact. She knows her, knows where she is, but there's not a whole lot of contact there. So I actually have another aunt in New York and could be one in DC, but my suspicion is she would be my mother's age and so might not be around anymore. So that says something about my grandfather, however you want to think about it, that he had multiple children, multiple different people. So they originally came from Saluda, South Carolina, went to DC, he went to New York. And then we found out that they had a couple of restaurants.
Yes.
And at some point we were going to look up on Google Maps to see if we could find these restaurants. And he was the cook. Because my Aunt Lorraine said he was better in
the kitchen.
In the kitchen. In restaurant terminology, they have the front of the house and the back of the house, which always used to bother me, but I guess I understand. The back of the house is the kitchen and where the cooking is done and the preparation and all of that. So he worked the back of the house because his wife's personality was much better in the front of the house. They kept him in the back of the house because he was very exacting, it sounds like. It was his way or the highway. And there's another son, my Uncle Claude, who I never got to meet either. But at some point, he threw him out of the house. So he really, you had to do things his way. But we found that he was a very hard worker. And he, although he was exacting, and it sounds like he could be difficult, she talked about him every evening feeding, she said the bums, but we would say the homeless, people who were unhoused, who were living around the area, and fed them every day food from the restaurant. So there had to be that giving nature, because you could have decided to throw it all away.
Right.
But instead you fed the people in the neighborhood who needed to have food. So those are some things we know about him, that we learned about him. Maybe there are other stories that will emerge over time, like everything else. When you start talking about people, all these stories come up. I mean, there is a little bit of census information we have on Ancestry. I think I saw his military registration card that lists his mother, so those kinds of things. But he's not one of those people who seem to have a huge story, because once he left Saluda, went to DC to New York, it would probably be more the cousins in New York that would have much more of a story than the folks in South Carolina, because it looks like when he left, he never really came back.
Well, there was the one instance where Aunt Lorraine had said that they went down to Saluda.
Yeah, they visited.
So they visited, they knew their grandparents, they knew their cousins, which I think is not as common as well, folks who have gone through, experienced the Great Migration and then being able to go back to their communities of origin to have that relationship with family. So that was part of her growing up experience, that they went back at least once or twice, that she had the memories of going to essentially the farm in Saluda. And the other thing with Walter was that was interesting was he moves up to New York, and Grandmom, Queen Esther, also has a daughter before you all. So there's Aunt Renee, and to have her, she goes up to New York.
Yeah, she was born in New York.
And so the thought that we've come up with is possibly that when she got pregnant in South Carolina, that she went up to stay with her father. But the timing of it would have been such that Aunt Lorraine was maybe 4 or 5, really young.
She was so tiny. She doesn't remember my mother, her sister, at all.
So, the overlap of timing would say that probably Grandmom went up to New York, and if she didn't stay with them, probably nearby, but there was family there that could help in this, situation with an unwed mother and going to a new community and so on. So but that's also interesting to me, that she doesn't remember her older sister at all.
Nothing. But she knew Aunt Bernice.
Yes.
So she knew Mommy's sister, but she didn't know Mommy.
And has recollections and can identify all of Aunt Bernice's kids.
Right.
So had a really close relationship with them, but not with Grandma.
Yeah, it just strikes you how in much of my mother's family, we didn't exist. That from her mother's family, the Logans, we didn't exist. And from for Walter's family, they knew about us. I mean, they knew about us because his sister Thelma raised my mother.
Right.
So, we talked to her, but we never talked to Walter at all. Just never. That never put him on the phone. I don't know if him and Mommy had a conversation. I don't know.
Well, I wonder if there was some division between Grandma, Queen Esther, and Aunt Bernice as to the fault within the fissure in Nana Sarah and Walter's relationship, because Aunt Bernice never forgave Nana Sarah for leaving them, for not coming back. But she obviously had a relationship with her, half sister. So by extension, probably talked to her father at some point or another. But Grandma never did. So, but she did have a good relationship with Nana Sarah. That took time, but still
No, they had a good relationship. I mean, I lived with my grandmother in Columbus. That was the grandmother that was our biological grandmother. The aunt who raised my mother would call and say, "Do you know who this is?" And we would say no, and she would say, "Well, this is your grandmother." And then I would look at my mother. It's like, "No, Nana Sarah's my grandmother. Who's this?" And she would get very upset that we didn't call her grandmother, but we kind of knew that she was our aunt. She just happened to raise my mother. So all those relationships, my siblings get confused over who's who and what's what. And the podcast has helped everybody try to figure out all these relationships all over the place. But again, we did find out about these cousins that are up in New York that we don't have contact with. But I think I had vaguely heard their name before. So they had left South Carolina and gone up to New York. So that's probably why Walter was up there.
Well, and another avenue to explore, to recover story and to learn a little bit more about him, but also the family at that time. The other thing I have to give credit to Walter was that he did have or attempt to have a relationship with all his kids, because they all, like, Aunt Lorraine knew of these other kids, most of them.
She did, because she said she visited the one in D.C.
Right.
At some point.
And they had the Satterwhite last name, so...
we're not sure about the one in D.C.
Right.
The one in New York has the Satterwhite. She's still living, so she has the Satterwhite name. Aunt Lorraine, I think, she found her by accident, though, because, again, people kept calling her this other woman's name. And finally, she puts two and two together and realizes, oh, I have another sister. And she told us that when we visited her in New York several years ago. And I said, "Aunt Lorraine, I'm not trying to find nobody else. And she said that she may have told us then that there was another one in D.C. It's like, oh no, I can't find another one of y'all. So
the Papa was a Rolling Stone story here.
Can't find except I have since tried to search for the one in D.C. But again, because I don't think her given name was Satterwhite, and not knowing her age or anything, there's nothing that's popping up connected to the family. And we haven't pursued the other aunt in New York because not sure she'd want us to pursue her. So maybe that'll develop after time. But I'm sure many of you all have stories about relatives popping out of the woodwork and finding people. And I've always said, the old people try to cover all these secrets up, but all this stuff will come to light. It's either while you're alive or when you're gone. It's going to all come to light. So you might as well just get these secrets out.
Just claim it.
Just claim the secret, because it's coming out.
Well, and the other piece that was a wonderful discovery with Aunt Lorraine was all the pictures. So she shared so many pictures of herself and her brother as a child, of her father, of her mother, and those are priceless. So
yeah, her brother died almost weeks, days around the same time that Aunt Bernice died. So they died the same year and within very short time of each other. So I unfortunately never met him, except I've seen his pictures and but never got to know him.
Well, and the discovery of these cousins, and that helped us to learn more about Walter's mother, and the cousins are descended from her sister. So learning more about that, another generation, through this conversation too, and that leading us back to ancestry and saying, oh, we actually already had much of this information. We just didn't have a fuller story of the context of these folks.
Yeah, because wasn't it two sisters that married to, what was the story?
Yeah, so they're two sisters, Annabelle and her sister. I think her sister was Minnie as well. There are a lot of like names that are repeated,
names.
Which I think is an incredible gift from our ancestors, where generation after generation kind of harkens back to previous names. So it's easier to say, oh, I belong to you, my people belong to you, because this name is repeated over and over again. So there were two sisters, and they married within the same community, and so their kids were just they grew up together, right? So and my great grandmother Annabelle was also the one who we identify as coming from an indigenous community. So learning more about her sister then helps to identify their parents even more firmly. So
yeah, because they always talk about why she and her mother were never were not enslaved, because they were part of the indigenous community. So that's the story that's passed down, that they were both from indigenous community. We're not sure which community, but I think somewhere I have where that family originated from, which is more the North and South Carolina, and they may have been part of that. A lot of that community was wiped out when the white people took all their land. And I don't think they're Cherokee or part of the Trail of Tears, but there's some connection with them all being chased out of town or having to leave the town.
With that, there's also this desire to find them on the Dawes rolls. There are a number of different rolls that were registering folks from indigenous communities from that region before a forced migration, primarily to Oklahoma. And there were some who wanted to be on those rolls, and then some who actually chose not to be on those rolls for different reasons. And one of the reasons that some people chose not to be on those rolls as a kind of protest was because they could see the writing on the wall of like, you got my name on a document. What are you going to do with that now? And those documents being used for tribal affiliation, which had some initial visioning for like benefits of keeping a community together, but that meant putting it on a reservation, stripped of a lot of resources and away from one's home community. So this is Trail of Tears stuff. This is so there. I think that there is also something to be said for trying to find our people on documents that aren't necessarily like the rolls, for example. So
there's a lot of work and a lot of Freedmen records. There's a lot of places to start looking for people, and as we keep going back and back, there may be very interesting stories that we'll be able to bring forth through generational archives.
Yep.
So I don't know that. So that is my great-grandfather, Walter Satterwhite, and we've learned a little bit more about him. And our next episodes we're planning out, so it's not 5 months again before you hear from us. It'll just be next week when you hear from us. And on YouTube, we'll have a few pictures of my great-grandfather and us walking on the red carpet or being on the red carpet at this event. So is there anything else you wanted to add?
I don't think so. I think that this is pretty full, and we're going to try and keep it up, y'all. Keeping it up, and offering you more information about our family, and hopefully leading you to be inspired to find your people, whether biologically connected or through just the folks who have helped to form you.
And we're hoping to have, again, part of our goal for this season was to have additional guests. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping this week to interview someone from my hometown that could tell us about the Black business community. And she happened to know my family very well. So knew me, but she's a good 20 years my senior. So not 20, really making her old, like 15 years my senior. So it would be interesting to talk to her about my hometown and some of her observations from growing there all her life and leaving for a while and coming back. So, and she's doing some planning herself because she doesn't have children, she doesn't have family. So she's an elder who's being proactive about looking at her future and where she's going to go and making decisions, which it would be great if everybody would do that. She's not leaving that up to chance. So I also want to talk to her about that experience as well. So with that, I think we are going to hopefully see you next week.
Well, the last thing that I'll say is that's coming is an update on the museum.
Yes.
And we have so much to talk about with that. And it's going to be opening in June.
Yeah, I would like to have what I call a soft opening in May to invite a few people over to get their feedback and comments. But the grand opening is going to be around that week of Juneteenth. So that's in the plans already, and it should be a wonderful experience. It's been a lot of work trying to bring this old property to a point that we could utilize it and open it up to other people. And it'll continue to be a work in process because it's a 100-year-old building. But it's been exhausting, but it has been fulfilling because people are listening to me about if you have things that you think should be, that you don't want to keep, but might be worthy of putting somewhere, just call me up. And that's what they're doing. And they're doing it with a vengeance. So that'll be a different discussion in the future. What do I do with all this stuff? But that's a good problem to have.
It is a good problem.
And now people are donating these old pictures, and I put a couple of them out on Facebook saying, do you know who these people are? Or do you know what this is about? Mm-hmm. And so, again, it's been a good experience.
Yep. So we will talk with you. Hopefully you will listen with us next time, and this will also be posted onto our YouTube page. If you like the podcast, you can like and subscribe. You can share the news with others, whether on Spotify or Apple or Google or YouTube. We are wherever you listen to or watch podcasts. Thank you so much for this week, and we look forward to connecting next week.